my wife is a preschool teacher, and we have a new baby. And in both of those that information, my wife has taught me about what object permanence actually means within children, and this idea that realizing that something exists even though you don't see it. And so, thinking about the past year and being away from people, living in a Zoom world, I kind of have been thinking a lot about those things that are maybe not in front of you, but still exist. And they, even as a metaphor, maybe in your personal life, of things that you've done before, things that you walk away from and come back to. Even thinking about people that have maybe different lives than you, that you don't know their story, maybe if it's hardships or whatever. Also thinking about our political climate, and even scientific, say, conversations that maybe have been a little bit suppressed in the past 4 years, and thinking about how there's been information that's maybe been covered up, but it's there. And so some of the things in the show, it's really about this idea of sharing in some ways.
That's great. And Terry, and in some ways, your work to me, and I'm going to start the video so we can see this. And early on in the tour, you have all these objects, and you don't seem to make art that isn't functional. And your background in ceramics is really interesting to me because you don't do anything related to ceramics except that everything you make is some sort of a tool. Do you want to explain that kind of idea to us a little, and how ceramics played into the work that
Well,
you now do?
yeah, I mean, actually, I went to the New York State College of Ceramics, but by the time I got there, I really didn't touch clay much.
Ah, interesting.
So um, I think even as an undergrad, I became interested in making objects that are tools. I think I have a lot of friends that are maybe making functional work, say like functional pottery, and I kind of love that idea that a thing functions. But then at the same time, I'm also very interested in this kind of absurd idea, and a lot of the work is very absurd, of making these sort of absurd tools that maybe tell a story.
And people cannot look at your work without seeing the material that you use so often, which is the tin can. Tell
Yeah,
us about you starting to use that work and how much it plays into so much of the presses and the actual prints. And I'll pause on the press so you can see
sure.
the tin cans here.
Yeah, so what you were basically looking at a little bit ago were matrices of printing matrices, and they were all built out of tin cans. And so tin cans, it's been 13 years ago, I cut open my first can and cut one up and wrapped it around another. And I just thought, like, it's such a beautiful object that is ubiquitous. And the idea that, when I first started working with it, it was because it was so present. And I think a sort of a poetry came through time, or like my language of being interested in it came over time through working with them. They're strong, they're sort of architectural, but they're also really sensitive and beautiful. The interiors, you can see this gold can at the top of the screen. The inside of a can, depending on the vegetable, is different. They're just these wonderful objects. And I also want to say that I think my father plays a lot into it, in being he was a farmer, and the idea of fixing things with like a tin can. For example, he can fix things with many things, but just that idea of retrofitting,
Mhm.
of something that's ubiquitous. Um, so yeah.
And
Uh,
at what point did you decide that they were going to be used in a printing process? I mean, they were sculptural at first and then they became part of the presses, or kind of what was the evolution of that into the print making?
Well, the actual making a print was pretty quick, actually, of imagining the shape that I could print, actually print the bottom edge of it, make a little line drawing. And then maybe this thinking about jumping back to the idea of maybe ceramics, but like these open bottom vessels, that then they could hold fluid. And so, um, I was making these prints, but then over time, I started to realize that this weight was important. And so this really, not only of these objects are cumulative, but like learning about them and making them and developing them was really cumulative.
Mhm.
And so this idea that then the weight and the pressure could be not could be, is part of the language of making something.
Mhm.
Slowness. A lot of times these images look like rocks or minerals and those are also built with time and
Mhm.
slowness.
Mhm. Let's show the images that are made so you can see where the cans have made the imprint. But talk through the ink and the metals and the minerals and all of the stuff that ends up running through the press, um, as well.
Sure. So in a little bit, you'll see sort of the back of the press where there's these tubes that go down into these open bottom vessels. And sort of also through the years, I've been collecting materials that I could use to sort of oxidize, if it's metals, oxidize to make inks. In this case, there's a lot of blue, green, which is copper, and then actual iron, which is like more rust. But then collecting of different dirts, um, and then um, and then also making walnut ink, finding rocks and grinding them up, sweeping dust off the studio floor, kind of making this large vocabulary of what the inks can be. These ones were made in Arkansas, um, in preparation for a show that I had in Arkansas, where I was also using quite a bit of dirt from Arkansas, and I collected some from Mississippi.
Mm. And in terms of like, tell us of how these unfold. And I think it's worth mentioning that the three presses, the printing presses that are in the show, are going to be printing. So there's actually paper underneath them. The inks will be going through them. How long do they take to make? What's that process look like? Do they move? Like, that's been so fascinating to me to watch that.
Sure. Yeah. So, it really depends on the space. So I'm going to be learning Opalka space. But in my home, I can make a print in 3 days.
Hmm.
One run once, and so these piles and tiers and strata that make up the presses, I have to take the whole thing apart to make one. But in this case, this is 16 runs, so
Hmm.
16 different scenarios at probably 3 days each. So it kind of took quite a while to make
Mm.
this. I started it um, a month ago and probably finished it just a couple days ago, really. Last week.
And these are, I mean, these are so recent. They're just lovely. But I think what these showcase so well is the true kind of amazing shapes and texture you get on the surface of the paper. Can you talk a little bit about the actual kind of mineral deposits and salts that you see in your prints and how you achieve those?
Sure, sure. So the background is actually walnut ink that I made from walnut ink from here around Lake New York. Um, uh, and This blue is copper and it's oxidized. For the most part, this is copper, but I oxidized several metals, and so it kind of has a range in there. But so oxidizing it with hydrogen peroxide, vinegar, things like that, and adding salts, and then you actually get some of the salt showing up in the copper, so you have some crystallizing in the blues particularly. Um, the I'll talk about this a little bit more in the talk, but there's some inks that have come from Santa Barbara here, from 16 meters below sea level. Sorry, 600 meters about below sea level. Um, and It's been sort of processed into an ink. Um, there's this white ring here around each form, and that is something that was more recently developed in the past I'd say 10 months or so, but it's actually just water from my studio in Iowa City. So basically, I've been filling vats of water and letting it dry out in my studio. And the white sort of calcium deposits have been, drying to the edge of the bucket that they're in, and then scraping out the bucket and making these more distilled. It's just water,
Mhm,
from water.
mhm.
Um,
That, that's wonderful. And I think that your discovery as you work through these prints is so fascinating. We've really tried to showcase some of that. But I think that in these prints you really see that. They also change. You've told me they change over time, the prints do. Is that something that you welcome?
yes, yes, I welcome it. There's a certain point where they sort of stop, but particularly that beautiful blue of the copper, it when the light hits it, it actually goes bluer.
Mm,
And some of um, the steel actually oxidizes a little bit more longer. Yeah, and there's different inks that change differently.
mhm.
Some of the dirts like really stay put. Um, yeah.
Just pause on these, just because we're here at the tour, but tell us a little about these smashed cans, which are a really fun part of the show.
Yeah, so these are actually uh, cans that are just found in the street in Iowa City, and they are basically Bud Light cans, Red Bull cans, that were found walking into school to the University of Iowa where I teach, and for the past 2 years or more, actually, going on 3 years, I've been collaborating and learning from a great deal from Dr. Joan Bernhard, who studies foraminifera. She's a research scientist at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. And so when I first started learning about these microorganisms, I was kind of, doing my best to learn about them from afar and really obsessing about them. And walking in, I saw their shapes everywhere. And so there's something about the general shapes of some of these cans that was really connecting to the foraminifera. And
Mhm.
then I was using them almost in this like really primitive way as a surface to make marks on, to draw on. Sometimes I was making perforations and bumps and that sort of um, uh, mimicked the microorganisms. But then at the same time, I was also playing and inventing. And I should mention that the foil printing is a process that is, basically similar to printing on books.
Mhm.
You know, and it was foil printing is something that was developed further, sort of at the University of Iowa by a printmaking professor years ago, and so we have some access to it. And so I've been sort of slowly experimenting with foil printing.
That's great. That's great. And talking about your work with Dr. Bernhardt, we're going to turn now to another printing press called Biomarkers, which was very much tied to the work you did with her and her research team. You want to tell us about this project?
Yeah, I want to make a mention of Dr. Samuel Bowser and artist Laura von Rosk, who introduced me to Dr. Bernhard
Mm.
through an exhibition, and the theme was adaptations to extremes. And so uh, I, the there's many reasons why you study, uh, why Dr. Bernhardt studies foraminifera, but something that I learned about was that their ability, these interesting ways that they're adapting to extreme weather change and low oxygen environments. And so in 2018, I was lucky to sort of shadow um, Dr. Bernhardt and her team of scientists and researchers and a crew on a ship in Santa Barbara. And then I also got to travel to Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute to look at uh, the research facilities and the projects that were going on. And in that time, I was in the travels, I was collecting materials and learning about foraminifera. And so I built this tool, this printing press, of just sort of collecting all the junk, um, things from the garbage, things that were given to me, broken tools for sea exploration, and and then at the same time, sort of ruminating on these microorganisms.
Mhm.
Now there's a, actually I'll save this next little bit that I was going to mention. But did you have a question, Judy? Were you going to say something?
Well, I mean, just that type of collaboration and cross-disciplinary work. I mean, it's not easy for an artist. I mean, how does that how do you where did you come to that? But I mean, I know you saw this exhibition, but I mean, I don't know a lot about artists who say, "Let me go out on a research vessel." I mean, how did that happen? I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Well, yeah, there's quite a few things I'll be talking about in the artist lecture of the experience of being on the ship. But it was very much a foreign experience for me.
Hmm.
And even I always joke that I have this interest in science, but sometimes I think it might be like a middle school education that I've been just, I am just really sort of hungry and learning about this stuff, or maybe also learning about the people that are doing this intense research and this like fascination with something. But I'd like to say that when on the ship, I I was helpful in that, um, there was a one job that required scooping up mud and putting it into containers and measuring it all out, and I thought, oh, this is what I do in my work.
And what is it like for them to have an artist on board? I mean, what is that like? That can't be a normal experience for them either.
Well, I hope that we have um, we will have to ask Joan when she gives
Yeah.
Dr. Joan Bernhardt when she gives a talk on February 17th.
Hmm. Great. That's a good thought. And you're hoping to go out with her again, correct? Like the possibility.
Possibility, we've been talking about something in the future. Yeah.
Mhm. And the prints that come out of the press that you made, for instance, they're very similar to the other presses, but they are the inks also kind of derived from moments in that work.
Yeah, actually, a lot of the prints that are in the show are actually made from the things that I collected at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute and Scripps in California, but also I was specifically taking some of the parts of machines and oxidizing like a chipboard, and collecting the fluid from that and really trying to do it in a safe way where it was all sort of contained, but then using that as an ink. I
Mhm.
think I'm more interested in that idea of the where, yes, it's mostly copper, but there's also these foreign
Yeah.
substances in it. And that was there's a lot of vocabulary that I learned in working with the scientists, in that, for example, like the title of this piece is biomarkers,
Mhm.
and biomarkers being a sort of a measurable found trace of something foreign in an organism.
Mhm.
And that is both a sort of a fascinating and scary thought.
Mhm. Mhm. That's great. These are a couple etchings and some other work related. Do you want to say anything about these quickly?
I'd like to maybe talk a little bit about the one on the right that was sort of triangular.
Mhm.
That is there's there's from what I gather, there's uh, thousands of different kinds of foraminifera, and on the
Different shapes and you mean, yeah.
species. And so this one on the right actually is sort of a collector, and it's kind of modeled off of looking at a photograph of one, which I don't I can't say the scientific name because I just cannot say it. But it, um, the 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 foraminifera has pseudopods that actually collect stuff. to build its home, its
Hmm.
test. So
Hmm.
what we're actually looking at is actually the shell that was built from collecting of
Oh,
sand
wow.
particles and and building it up. And I kind of can relate to that.
Well, and it's very much like your prints. It's what's left behind after some very complicated process.
Mhm.
These etchings are just lovely, and they just call to me that they're from the sea. Talk a little bit about these prints. These are quite interesting.
These are this is a double-sided silkscreen print where it was just kind of a rumination on imagining what the surface of a foraminifera might be like.
Hmm.
And then this is a sort of looking at some photos of another agglutinated foraminifera. And then this is funny because it's early on just trying to understand foraminifera,
Hmm.
before going out to sea. Now this is a woodcut, a laser etched woodcut of uh, an electron scan microscope image, I believe, from Dr. Bernhard.
So the shapes are real. Had you known before you worked with her about these little guys and what all the different shapes they come in and the formal kind of aspects of them?
I heard about them a little bit. I went to a lecture once by another scientist, but I really didn't know too much.
Hmm. And your prints really start to look a little like them as you start to understand them. I mean, is that intentional? The very organic kind of single celled shapes of
Sure,
your.
yeah, and I think I think of those more traditional prints, the woodcuts, the etchings, and that as this space of where I was kind of learning about
Hmm.
them, and then also learning. I was doing some invention, and so like taking an idea from a forum and maybe elaborating on it and making some sort of fictional
Hmm.
part to it. And you know, we call these prints. They have a scientific name, and
Hmm.
I shorten it to anoxiki, but it's Dr. Bernhardt and Dr. Samuel Bowser actually came up with the title. And so it's fun to kind of go into the gallery and see the title of the scientific name of sort of invented foram.
Oh, that's wonderful. I mean, discovery is so much a part of your practice. And I think one of the things that was so fun to, as we started putting the show together, was, we knew about your presses and the beautiful prints that you were making and making and making. You're so prolific. But then, during COVID, you kind of started this whole other discovery process, with sound pieces. And let's talk a little bit about why now with the sound pieces. And I loved, your story about your daughter, as well as how this fits into kind of the art as a functional object.
Yeah, I think as a kid growing up in Buffalo, I think my entry point to art was through music and
Mhm.
the spirit of like the community of, coming together to work together to make some music. And I wouldn't say that I'm a great musician or anything. I know a little bit about guitar, but I guess I'm really interested in the making of these instruments that maybe other people use to play, um, but but also they're just like this connecting point.
Mhm.
And I played guitar for a long time, but when my daughter was born, making some sound and some music has been really great in terms of communicating with her and getting to know her.
Mhm. And they're lovely cigar box guitars. And we're really excited that musicians will join Terry on Thursdays to play some of these instruments, and we'll have some videos of these being played. This massive sound piece was really quite an incredible thing that you created for this show. Let's talk about this. And again, this is something that we have another video after the tour that shows this working with all of the wonderful sounds that it makes. But I can't forget the times when we would talk and you would send us these crazy sound clips of the kind of sounds that you were getting that came from these very simple tools, which are cans just being hit in weird rhythmic ways. Tell us about how this all began.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and I think it is sort of a, um, it really came out of the pandemic and, starting to play guitar again, making guitars, learning about sound. But I think it goes back to they're very much in the press family, like cousins of the press, where there's these tin cans that I've been, working with them. I would just notice a sound moving around, and you know, I often think I'm gonna walk away from the tin can, and then I I feel like there's another way that I need to explore it.
Hmm. Hmm.
And and it's been in even just the way hanging one up on the wall. Oh, it's this beautiful red, and then it's this metal, like how it sounds when it's touched.
Hmm.
um so I think it's just this unending. I mean, it's the simplest thing
Hmm.
everywhere, but I feel I'm continually surprised by
Yeah, yeah, they've provided you a lot of inspiration. In terms of how this all works, again, you'll get to see it in just a minute. Introducing sound to your work, have you been surprised at how easy or hard that has been?
I think I'm definitely not naturally equipped for sort of electronics,
Hmm.
in terms of like more of the digital aspect of it, but the more analog approach
Hmm.
is really fun. And but I love learning about it, and I think that this shows it's also still really new.
Hmm.
So when I make a printing press like this one, um, I'll make it and it'll deal with some formal issues, some color, and then also sort of content.
Hmm.
Where so this was all collected for the most part. The materials collected around like Hudson River, around this area. I was kind of ruminating on the water, and you know, I make the press and I make these matrices, and then it's not like the first print is how I want it to be or how I expect it to be.
Hmm.
I have to get to know this thing.
Yeah.
And so the sound piece that we were just looking at, I feel like we're just getting to know each other.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I'm also very excited to have some people come in and get to know it and show me things.
Hmm. That's gonna be a lot of fun. And again, that'll be Thursday nights. This press called Folly. We have a couple prints that are associated with this press. And again, these are going to be printing during the show. And on Thursdays, Terry will be working these presses, pulling the sheets off, showcasing what's underneath them. So a few more prints. We're going to pivot now to another work, which is very kind of uh, related to another project that we couldn't fit into the show, sadly. We are hoping to showcase some of the work that did get cut from the show in over Instagram and everything. But you call this kind of a manipulative. Talk us through the concept of a manipulative and how this tool, this very simple printing tool, works and how this is related to this larger installation, which we're going to end on.
Sure. So a manipulative is like a child's toy that can, like a block of wood that can be a car or it can be a giraffe. Y- and it's sort of imagining the same thing having multiple uses and lives. And it kind of goes back to my partner Rachel Ziegler Sheridan being a preschool teacher and interested in thinking about child development and like play. And so much of my work is about play,
Mhm.
and learning from it. So these are all lithographs that were made with this tool that is, is the single tool that can be adjusted and moved around on the lithographic stone. And then I poured a lithographic drawing to ink, um, touche on the tool, and then use it to print. Uh,
Mhm.
Processing the stone, it's a long process, but I love this idea of envisioning what the thing can be,
Right,
so a manipulative.
right,
Um,
right.
and so moving on to this piece, this new piece that's in the middle of the space, it's called the Iowa Booth, um, and it's based on a more sort of antique, I guess, voting booth um, that my partner and I came across years ago and have held on to it. This beautiful design where the original voting booth design is four-sided, where the table pops up and you can write on it, and it's your voting and fits one person. And this is actually going to be the space that I will be virtually presenting from with others, and also doing maybe introductions for the um, the visitors to the show and the presenters on
Mhm,
Thursday nights. And so it's a space that is it's not about the single person. It's about a shared space, a sharing of ideas,
mhm,
and a space to learn.
mhm.
So kind of not about the single person, but sharing.
Well, and like the tools, it's adaptable to what you will be doing in the space, and I kind of love that idea that it will change every week depending on who you're presenting, what they're doing, what's happening in the residency, what's happening in the space. It's modular. The panels actually will change as well, so it's a really lovely, very dynamic piece that I think captures so well some of the interesting themes in your work, but in this installation that, because of COVID, you really thought of as a way to really invite that collaboration digitally so that we can present over Zoom if people aren't going to come in. So,
Yeah,
uh,
and it's also not just a space for me to make programming. It's been great to come up with ideas with you and Amy to.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, we're excited. Let's talk a little bit just quickly about what that schedule looks like of who is going to be part of that formal kind of programming that we're calling Dispatches from the Iowa booth, which will start on February 11th.
Sure. So on February 11th, Sylvia Secchi will be presenting, and she is a colleague at the University of Iowa who studies the environmental impacts of agriculture
Mhm,
and, and focuses on water sustainability. So that's February 11th. Um, Dr. Joan Bernhard, um, research scientist, senior scientist in the geology and geophysics department at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, will be talking about her research and her story. So that's February 18th. And uh, Tommy Santa Claus, a musician currently living in Iowa City, originally from California, has a will be presenting and has a discography of like 14 self-release albums, and he makes wonderful music and noise. Um, that's February 25th.
great.
Dante Hayes, a ceramic artist, also a printmaker. Um, his art practice pulls from an interest in hip hop culture, history, and science fiction. The artwork that he makes references visual traditions from southern United States, the Caribbean, South America, and the African continent. And that's March 4th. Um, Brian Dewan will be presenting some sounds on March 11th, and Brian is he's a little bit of everything: an instrument builder, sculptor, filmmaker, singer, songwriter, wonderful person. And we will have other um, things listed on the Opalka site, I believe, soon.
Mhm. That's right. No, those are good. Those are gonna be wonderful programs, Terry. And you'll be kind of hosting a conversation with these folks, and they'll be presenting their work. And then outside of those kind of formal, we are those formal programs, we are going to be doing a lot of stuff again on like Instagram Live. We will be doing stuff on the exhibition website, and it'll be quite a bit of stuff planned that Terry's going to be doing in the space. So a lot of ways to connect with Terry's work. We're so lucky, Terry, that you're here, because normally you're in Iowa. Do you want to tell us a little bit about moving to Iowa and what that has done with your work and being back, and working just through this crazy year? I don't know any artist whose practice wasn't deeply affected by everything that's going on.
Yeah. Well, I'd say that the past year has been a lot of family time, because teaching online, and that's been so wonderful to get to know a new daughter. And access to school has been fairly limited.
Mhm.
Uh, and so that's where I like to work in the print shop alongside of students and, a shared space. I have my own studio, but I kind of really like occupying that space with an energy, and so that's been kind of really difficult because we all can't really work together as much.
Yeah,
Like requirements on rooms and that.
yeah,
Um, I think, being in Iowa has really gotten me thinking about, I think some general themes of my work have been the land and our mark on the land, and that, and being in Iowa and around farming, it's kind of an interesting thing to learn more about. And, and also that's, um, another reason why it's nice to have Sylvia talking about the effects of
yeah,
agriculture, because she's thinking about the Midwest
yeah.
with her work. Um, but yeah, Iowa is, in some ways, it's very similar to where I grew up, Buffalo, but also it's a very different place, very flat. But get to work with amazing faculty, and there's just wonderful students, and print department's really wonderful.
That's great. That's great. Well, we're lucky to have you for this semester and for the show.
Mhm.
Now's a great time to ask questions. Does anyone have questions for Terry? Again, throw them in the chat, and we can have a short conversation before we'll showcase one of the compositions on the sound piece that Terry did just this afternoon.
Sure,
So,
we got a question here. Can you
can
say
you?
more?
Oh, go
Okay,
ahead.
you can read it.
Can you say more about the large printing presses? Do you manipulate the structure like the smaller manipulative lithographs? Your work is so fascinating. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Thank you so much. So the large printing presses, so it's important, each print, every time making an impression, um, I take the strata down, take it apart, and then put it back. So visually, the presses will look a little different every time, or sometimes a lot different.
Mhm.
I think sometimes for me in a gallery, you notice it more when like it's almost made an about face or something, or it turned. Um, I think the question might not be just about that, about them physically, but then also how they sort of dance on the paper. The more recently, and I've wanted to do it for a while, of oftentimes I was doing just one run, one impression, and now I've more recently started doing multiple on top of each other, next to each other really tight, or walking the matrix along the paper, like you saw in that first large piece in the beginning, the three large brown panels. um,
Well, and Terry, as we were putting the show together, I loved how you talked a little bit about what it's like been having an infant and giving up control, and how in your work you've started to give up a little more control and allow chance to play a larger role in the mark making. Can you talk about that?
yeah, and it's funny, I think it's yeah, there's been some letting go of, and also maybe I think that there, when I first started these, I might have been a bit uptight of like having an idea of what a good impression might be, but then also setting with it. There, interestingly, the print that's actually printing right now in the front of the space, in that one, I'm printing on top of an old print that 5 years ago I really liked, and more recently I was kind of thinking this needs more, and so yeah, it's I kind of like that idea too, that it's a slow evolving thing. Y-
Hmm.
and so I would have, not, I think it is very true that, having a baby made, has like offered me to let some things go and also be more playful, I think.
Hmm. Hmm. That's wonderful. Let's see. Kathy had a question. Kathy Moon, do you want to ask your question? If you could unmute yourself, you can ask a live question. Would be great.
Sure. I was curious about, I can see that each press has multiple levels, but it looks like the paper is only at the bottom and the ink is maybe the next level up. So what goes on above that? Like, what are all the extra weights and levels for?
Well, in some cases they're at the the so the yes, everything falls down to the bottom. The it is, the different levels are sort of, in some cases they're storage, um, in some cases they are weight, but there's also an architecture. The ink is, in this case you can sort of see in the back, it actually comes from more up top by the barrel is where I sort of load in the the plumbing basically that goes down to the bottom, and then the some of that plumbing is actually bent and like gets kinks, and so sometimes the ink like slowly drips. Sometimes I put a little like piece of paper or something to slow down the drip, um, and then sometimes it just goes directly down fast. So, but yeah, it's like there is storage. There is, yeah, it functions as weight, but it's also like color is a function, um, and but they all sort of the materials are collected in this like, you know, I have sort of parameters based on maybe the question that somebody's asking me or the question I'm asking myself, and kind of picking what the strata might be.
Mhm. Um, any other questions, anyone? Jake Jones has a question. Jake, would you like to answer ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Terry. Congrats on the show. It looks great.
Hey, good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. Sorry, I joined a little late. I didn't notice the EST time zone. So I may have missed you talking about this, but I would love to hear more about your experimental instrument building practice and how it fits within the scope of the show.
Yeah, well, yeah. So, yeah, it's we talked a little bit about it, and we're going to do a little performance, sort of in a little bit. But so it's still sort of found object tool making, and so everything is found and altered, aside from sort of some of these electronic components. But they're also, I think they relate to some of the tools, the printing presses, but I also think they relate to some of those manipulative tools where just retrofitting an object to do something else and to have sort of another life. Um, yeah, I do think of a lot of the things I make as figures, little figures, the presses, big figures, but then how these things interact and communicate with each other are also figures. Um, the guitars too are, in some cases they're pretty, they're all, found, they're sort of lo-fi, but maybe crafted, but they're also, you know, sort of found materials in that. Yeah. How's that, Jake?
Yeah, I mean, that's great. Thank you. I mean, that image looks amazing. I'm excited to hear more.
Sure, sure.
Thanks, Jake. On a related question, Dean, would you like to ask your question? Oh, you're still muted, Dean.
All right, there we go. That's still, this Zoom thing's still pretty new. Hi, Terry.
Hey, buddy, how are you?
Good. I got here a little late, so I missed the whole first part, but I'm loving seeing the work big time. And I'm super interested in the sound aspect of it. So do you want to discuss like what was the impetus to bring you out of the printmaking into the sound making with it? And then secondly, do you plan on integrating the two into the sound makers also being concurrently print makers?
Yeah, yes to that second question. And then I do want to say that I think right now, even the show, the communication between those objects, this piece and the presses and all the other things, like it's already happening, you know, in just the day or so that we got finished with hanging the show. But yeah, we're gonna do a little sort of a lo-fi video of presenting that piece that we were just looking at, the wood piece that we were just looking at. And so yes, and it is sort of motorized motors and sort of contact mics in that. So yeah, does that answer?
Well enough. Yes. Nice work.
Yeah. Well, Dean, it's really nice to hear your voice. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thanks, Dean. Sorry, everyone, for seeing my desktop. Zoom has always got those awkward moments, so I apologize. Chet Opalka mentioned, Terry, that you're a chemist. That, you know, the reactions you're getting on the paper is very chemical. Have you had to study chemistry? Have you had to understand that, or is it all just happenstance?
Yeah, printmakers in general, I think often are thought of as a chemist. They're also thought of as cooks, but I'm probably more on the chemist end. Or chemistry, but also I'm a tinkerer, so I don't necessarily know where I'm going. I just want to make sure if when I do it, it's safe. So I do that research, you know, search for me or others, you know. But yeah, it's really an intuitive sort of exploration, but then it kind of sharpens up. So I think that a chemist has a more specific question and walks towards it. A scientist might have that question and moves towards it, where I kind of play and then develop more questions. But I do think that there are parallels with, you know, the sciences and discovery.
That's great, Terry. Chet Opalka, who is a chemist and had a wonderful career as a chemist, says he can totally identify.
Wonderful.
So, and that process of discovery is so evident in your work. So I really hope people will see it. For those of you who just joined, we are recording this, and so we will make this available to you. If you want to drop your email in our chat, we can email that to you right away. It's also going to be on the exhibition website as well as on our YouTube channel. So there'll be ways to see the whole opening and tour if you didn't make it. And again, Thursday nights, Terry will be in the gallery and we'll be broadcasting on Instagram Live and other channels so that you'll be able to participate in the show. So I think we've talked it up enough, Terry, that maybe we got to show the sound piece. What do you think?
Okay, sounds good.
All right, let's see if I can get behind. Again, it's very lo-fi, and we're gonna try to do this over Zoom. So give me 1 second here. Can you guys see the start of the video? Great. All right, let's play. Okay, there we have it. I hope that translated over Zoom. Did that sound okay to everyone? Oh, good, good, good. It's shockingly elegant, the sounds that creates, Terry. And watching the video, I mean, I saw you do it in person, but watching the video, I mean, you do play it like an instrument. You are kind of, you know, going from one to another parts of it. But I'm glad that we translated again, not to be not to take the place of seeing it live. So we hope there'll be opportunities for that. Any questions about the sound piece now that you've seen it? Victoria asked Terry, will there be recordings of the sound piece?
Yes, there will be, and there is, and I'll be making more through the course of the show. So I'll be sure. We got to figure out a way to share them, but I'll be sure to share them in some way.
That's great. And I think mentioning too that as part of Terry's Thursday nights kind of in residence in the gallery, he will be inviting musicians in to play it themselves and to play and record with it. Again, with that kind of collaboration in mind. So there'll be some recordings of other people playing Terry's instruments. And this, of course, is the larger piece, but you also have the small unitars and 3-string guitars and the cigar box guitars. So those two will be part of what gets experimented with on Thursday nights as well. So.
Great.
Wonderful. Well, if there's no other questions, I want to just thank everyone for coming tonight. There will be so many ways to interact with the show and with Terry and with so many of the collaborators that he's bringing in. But again, please come see the show and come during open hours or make an appointment to come. We really hope that you do feel safe. And if you have any questions about that process, please reach out to us again at opalka@sage or on social media. Our website is opalka.sage.edu. Our email is opalka@sage.edu. And it's such a pleasure to host Terry's work for the next few weeks and to host Terry in the gallery. So thank you, Terry, for being here. We look forward to all the wonderful things that will happen during the exhibition. And thanks everyone for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. This recording will be made available very soon on our website. So please join our mailing list and we'll make that those links available. So thank you, everyone. Be safe, be warm, and we hope to see you really soon. Good night.
Thank you.